Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this very important spotlight session on energy systems for climate resilience, strategic and technical solutions. My name is Ok Joo-jung, climate change specialist at Asian Development Bank. I'm honored to serve as your moderator this morning. It's 9 a.m. Manila time, and for many of you, it might still be quite early due to the time difference. Thank you so much for your participation. Before other colleagues to join the session, and in the meantime, we'd like to propose a quick warming up exercise using the Menti survey. I think I hope that you are familiar with the Menti survey. So please, Ivan, is it ready? Okay. So we have straightforward, very simple 5 questions for the Menti session. So please, using your mobile phone or tablet or laptops, please scan this QR code or go to www.menti.com and please enter this code. And if you see a pop-up asking for permission, please make sure that you accept it. And once you enter the code, you will see the questions one by one and also responses in real time, as we know. So, okay, are you ready? Okay, great. So let's get started. So yes, great. So we have our first question here. Can you see your first question? Okay. So are you currently involved in the planning or designing or implementation of an energy project? Please take yes or no. Okay, yes. So, most of us, we are involved in energy project and we are energy expert. Let's move to the second question. How well do you think your energy project or energy systems or energy infrastructure in your country in general, they address climate adaptation considerations? So you have 3 choices. The first one is fully address. Yes, we fully address climate adaptation. And the second, somewhat, more or less. And the third response, possible response is not really. So we not address yet climate adaptation considerations. Okay, so somewhat, more or less, we are considering, but not fully at this stage. It's very interesting. 23 participants in this room have already I think, we are ready, to think about this issue today. And then we can move to the third question. Please select only one. Which climate risk poses the most significant threat to your energy project or energy systems in general in your country? We know that all risk might be relevant, but please select only one which you consider the most important and the critical threat. Okay, so heavy rainfall or floods or related to the precipitation and the changing precipitations. And also we have 5 people responded. The drought is the most challenging obstacle, and also temperature increase or heat waves. So we have no participants who identify the landslide, and also 1 person for cold winters. Can you raise a hand who pick? Okay, great. So maybe you can share your experience during the Q&A session why we choose the cold winters. Thank you. And then we can move to the last question. So what are the most critical and enabling factors to improve the climate resilience of energy systems in general in your country or for your energy project? You can select up to 2 responses. Okay. So 1, 2 response for political will and the design standard, knowledge or data to evaluate and assess the physical climate risk. Okay, so design standard, the knowledge and the political will are the three top responses. Okay, thank you so much. It was very interesting exercise, and also, based on the responses, it's very clear that we have a diverse range of perspective in this room, and which will enrich our conversation today. So now, without further ado, let's officially start the session. I'm very pleased to invite Mr. Toru Kubo, Senior Director of Climate Change, Resilience and Environment, CCRE at ADB, to give the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Okshu. Good morning, everyone. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and speakers, thank you for being here. And I really want to thank you for joining this spotlight session. I've been in many ACEFs, and it's a tough choice, no? First of all, like third day in the morning, you get up, you've attended the receptions, and there's so many parallel sessions over there in the auditorium and here. So congratulations, you definitely made the right choice. And please don't leave. So I have just one main message today to open this session, and just a bit of history. We started ACEF about 20 years ago. So officially in 2006, we had a pre-ACEF in 2005, and around, and the focus was on renewable energy and energy efficiency. And then around 2008, 2009, we started to have conversations about climate proofing, right? Unfortunately, I have to say, those days of primarily focusing on climate proofing of projects and assets, they're over. It's just insufficient, utterly insufficient to address the kinds of risks and impacts we are facing today. And we have to take a more systems approach to ensure the resilience of our energy systems, and most importantly, the reliable energy supply, energy services to the people. So, I get to ask this question. I'm sure many of you, but I also attend many conferences. This is something for an energy conference. So how many of you are, I'm sure there are electrical engineers in the room. Right. Thermal engineers? No thermal engineers? Okay. All right, so I'm a thermal engineer by background. I was gonna say that we're changing the thermodynamics of the planet, right? Okay, that's too geeky. But we are changing the thermodynamics of the planet, and we're changing the water cycle. So we've seen the massive impact, the flooding, Pakistan, 2/3 of the country, right? Impacted 2 years ago. And then this year, Kazakhstan, massive flooding that happened. Torrential rain across Asia Pacific, and the extreme heat waves. 48 degrees heat index in Manila just a few weeks ago. 52 degrees heat index in Bangkok, right? This is heat index. It's a combination of temperature and humidity, right? How it feels to the body. But this week, earlier this week, just a pure temperature exceeded 50 degrees in Delhi, northern, central India. So what's really going on? Didn't we hear 2 degrees or like 1.5 degrees? How are we getting to 48, 50 degrees? Doesn't make sense. But unfortunately, I really think that we haven't communicated this issue well enough, right? So first of all, we're not on a trajectory to 1.5 or 2 degrees, I'm sad to say. Most of the scientists are saying that we're on a trajectory to at least 2.5 degrees increase by the end of the century. There was a survey just a couple of weeks ago. Half of the IPCC author scientists said that we will most likely exceed 3 degrees on average by the end of the century, and they're very depressed about it. Right. Now, okay, let's take 2 degrees. Is it really 2 degrees across the planet? No, you know this, right? It's average, and 70% of the planet is covered by water. So on land where people live and the people we serve and the energy systems, it's around 4 degrees. So when the planet warms on average 2 degrees, it's 4 degrees where we live. And at the higher latitudes where there's less air circulation, it's like 6 degrees to 8 degrees. So like in Central Asia, we're not talking about 2 degrees, we're talking about 6 degrees. And 1 degree of temperature rise, the atmospheric temperature rise, can hold roughly 7% more water, right? I mean, this is simple physics. So 4 to 6 degrees rise is like 30 to 40% more water in the atmosphere. So the higher heat sucks the moisture out of the soil, evaporation, it retains it in the air, and then it hits a cold mass and it just pours down. Right? So this is what's happening where we live, and it's having all sorts of impacts. And of course, the heat is melting the glaciers, right? So we're going to have a session later on how that impacts, hydropower and how we need to make the systems more resilient. So, we can't, and I'll repeat this, but we've been looking at the project boundary, right? And what can we do with the design and materials? But that is important. We still need to do that, but we have to look at the systems. So what is that? What are the options? Central or distributed approach to generation, redundancy, resilience, storage. How much does that cost? Interconnection with other grids. Can we look at a regional grid? How much does that cost? Routing and mapping of transmission, elevation of our systems, and then the design and the materials, and then the systems, right? The non-physical aspects of it. So we have 5 excellent speakers today. They're experts. They've been looking at this, and they'll share their experience, lessons learned, and their insights with us. I really want to thank our external experts, resource persons. So we have Jin Soon from IEA. Thanks for coming here. And we have David, who's been with us for many years, and they're real experts, frontliners in this area. We have our very own ADB experts, one expert coming from our resident mission. So thank you, Sonam, for coming here, and Kelly. We've been working together in the energy field for a long time. Belinda, from our disaster risk management. By the way, Belinda runs the ADB-wide Resilience Learning Month. So she's been one of the main trainers, organizers for Cross ADB. So she's here. And then, of course, Okshu and Argo for conceptualizing and organizing this session. So last word, right? You're all here, so you know how important it is, right? You're champions. So we're preaching to the choir a bit. I wish we had a loudspeaker we can blast to the other rooms, right? Because the folks in the other sessions, they may not fully appreciate the critical importance of this issue. And it's really accelerating, it's going to worsen. So please absorb and debate as much as we can, and then use the breaks to discuss further with the resource persons and the resource persons in this room as well, and then spread the word, right? So next year, we're going to come back to a room twice the size and absolutely packed. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Toto, for your thought-provoking and inspiring, opening remarks. So, as he mentioned, he is an energy expert and has been at the forefront of ADB's effort in pioneering climate-smart energy sector operations. And he currently oversees and directs ADB's climate change endeavors across all sectors. I believe he truly is the best person to open this session today. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation and introduction. Thank you so much. So now we zoom in on the topic of this session. And I think many of you enjoyed the climate resilience session on Monday, organized by Jin Sun. And here in this spotlight session, we will approach the energy systems climate resilience from a slightly different and a specific perspective, which we are calling it fundamental shift. So now let me invite Argo. Where is Argo? Okay, he's there. So Argo, he is our principal climate change specialist, leading the climate adaptation team at ADB, and he will deliver a scene setting presentation. Argo, the stage is now yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ogju. Good morning, everybody. First of all, apologies to ASF Secretariat for not following your format for the presentation. I thought it was good to have some change. And thanks to Toru for kind of already setting the scene, which actually asks for a change in which we look at adaptation and the energy system. So I will spend just a couple of minutes asking more questions than giving some answers on why this change is needed, what it could look like, and how we can achieve this change potentially. And then, of course, the speakers will actually provide more meaningful actual examples on the ground on what this change looks like. Oh, why is this change needed? We know that climate risk, whether it's floods, whether it's tropical cyclones, extreme heat, is already impacting the performance of energy systems. In countries like Bhutan, you're already looking at water shortages, how it's affecting hydropower production. In countries in the Pacific region, we know tropical cyclones are damaging energy distribution lines. In urban areas, as we heard from Toru, extreme heat is changing the need for more cooling. And these impacts are not just through the energy sector, but also through other sectors like water, transport, etc. And as a result of this, climate change is really threatening the way power reaches our homes, businesses, and other services. The question is, the energy infrastructure that we are building today and next decade will actually operate in a very different climate. Rare events that were past in the rare, considered as rare, will become much more common in the future and will have an economic and financial impact. So governments and private sectors will have to be prepared for increased asset losses, more cost spending towards operations and maintenance, reduction in revenues, etc. Which means that we have to fundamentally alter the context in which energy infrastructure is planned, financed, designed, implemented, and operated. Following current business as usual practices will only lead to increased cost of damage from assets, loss in revenue, and ultimately services, and will increasingly be a liability for the public sector. Thus, this asset-focused, incremental way of making an asset resilient, as Toru mentioned, is important, but is no longer sufficient in the current context. So what is the change that we're looking for? A change that helps us understand that we need to have a conscious focus on how investments in the energy sector and the wider system can make an entire system more resilient in which the infrastructure is located. So it's not about protecting one by one infrastructure, but seeing how energy infrastructure is absolutely critical for making a larger societal resilience. In order to do that, which means we really need to start looking at climate risk, not at the time when you're thinking about an investment. It's already too late. We have to move upstream and think about climate risk way before at a system level. And a climate risk faced current, but in the long-term future and across the entire life cycle of the energy system that you're designing. This shift is required in understanding risk and ensuring that risk information is the basis for your decision making. It also means that you have to invest in explicit measures that are meant for adaptation and resilience, be in the context of technology, in the context of planning, in the context of financing like insurance mechanisms, or better linking energy systems with early warning systems. So a whole range of measures are required, not to make the asset resilient only, but the system in which the asset is located, entire system resilient. These are easier to say, but very difficult to operate. So what does this practice look like? I think a fundamental shift has to happen in every country, in every sector, in the context of energy, but also other sectors, because these are all interlinked. That an understanding of risk becomes the basis for decision-making in all sectors. And this understanding of risk has to happen at a system-wide level, bringing all sectors together. And then only you can decide what investment should happen, where it should happen, and how that investment will going to manage the supply and demand side. But again, it's not enough to inform planning, which we have been doing a lot for many years. It's also informed then good to see if the planning is promoting more systemic approach, is the financing backing it? There is no point in doing a great integrated multi-sectoral plan when the financing is again going to happen sector by sector, project by project. So we have to shift the way financing happens for climate resilience. Much more longer term, much more programmatic financing is required to make the case for building a resilient system. And along with it's required a wide range of enabling environments, the right kind of policy reforms, institutional strengthening, improvement of standards and codes, and other regulations. It's only by looking at this picture much more holistically that we can ensure the energy systems can continue to provide the services they're meant to provide, reduce asset losses, reduce transaction cost of looking asset by asset, and more importantly, build resilience at scale. So I think for us in today's discussion is how do we make this shift at a system level and see how energy sector investments are themselves seen as a resilient solutions. I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Argo, for your very captivating scene-setting presentation. You have highlighted the importance of building resilience of a wider system and in a more holistic way, and rather than just to adapt to energy infrastructure in at-risk areas. And also you emphasize that we need the enabling environment and the incentive. So thank you so much again. And now let's move on to our panel presentations. And we have a diverse and esteemed panel of 5 speakers and who will share their experience and expertise. So can I invite you to join this podium? Thank you. First alive, the first servers. So please have a seat. Okay, thank you so much. So our first speaker is Sonam Jam, a project officer at ADB's Legend mission in Bhutan, serving as the focal point for the energy operations. And she will present the first large-scale solar power facility in Bhutan as an adaptation solution. So Sonam, and we are ready for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aviju. Good morning, everyone. It is a great honor to be here to discuss Bhutan's steps and approaches towards a sustainable and resilient energy future. As you all know, and as Toru and Orgo has clearly stated the importance of having a resilient structure, climate change presents unprecedented challenges to our global energy system, and Bhutan is no exception. Our heavy reliance on hydropower, while it is a testament to our very rich natural resources, also exposes Bhutan to a lot of challenges, making us very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. In response to these challenges, Bhutan is embarking on a very ambitious journey to diversify its energy mix by integrating renewable energy. By integrating renewable energy such as solar. I'm excited to share about our plans and progress in developing the first utility scale solar power plant. This project not only marks a significant milestone in our adaptation strategy, but also exemplifies our commitment to climate resilience and sustainable development. To begin, let's take a closer look at Bhutan's current energy landscape and the critical need for diversification in response to climate change. Bhutan's energy mix is almost entirely hydropower, predominantly through run-of-the-river. Currently, we have about 2,400 megawatts of installed capacity, out of which only 1.5 megawatt is from solar and wind. For the wind, we have just 2 wind turbines of 300 kilowatts each. And for the solar, we have a combined installed capacity of less than 1 megawatt. Therefore, this very heavy dependence exposes the energy sector to significant risks, such as fluctuating river flows and reduced water availability. Additionally, the hydropower infrastructures also faces increased threats from floods, glacial lake outbursts, landslides, and heightened sediment loads. Consequently, Bhutan's energy security and stability are increasingly at risk, underscoring the urgent need for diversification and resilience measures in the energy sector. Bhutan's National Adaptation Plan aims to enhance the energy system's resilience to climate change by diversifying its energy sources and improving the hydropower infrastructures. Some of the key strategies involve increased and strategic investments in other renewable energy, such as solar, some wind, more hydrogen, and also investing in other modalities of hydropower, such as reservoir type, pump storage, and overall increasing the climate resilience of the existing infrastructures. So Bhutan's first utility scale solar power plant is a 17 megawatt solar farm in the central part of the country. The blue dot with the red star is where the solar farm is located. And it is a significant milestone in the nation's climate adaptation efforts, as detailed in the NAP. This project embodies Bhutan's strategy to enhance its resilience to climate change. A comprehensive climate risks and vulnerability assessment for this project was done, which indicates that extreme events, which usually occur historically once in 50 years, will now occur more frequently. And we can see discharge levels increasing by up to 40 to 180%, depending on the climate scenario. So these challenges and these changes pose significant and substantial challenge to Bhutan's already very heavy reliance on hydropower. Now, how is this a threat to Bhutan's hydropower? We have very limited storage, And while we have an installed capacity of about more than 2,000 megawatts, but our firm capacity is only 415 megawatts, which means that in the summertime, we have extra surplus renewable energy, which we export to India. But in the winter times, we need to import energy from India. Therefore, during the longer winter droughts, we need to import more. And during the summer, when the monsoon is more intense and we have more rainfall, we're not able to utilize those additional rainfall because we do not have any storage. In this context, the solar power is an essential addition, providing stable and complementary energy source, which is less affected by the immediate climate impacts. So this is a picture of the solar farm in Sifu. The project's financing includes $18.26 million from the Asian Development Bank and almost about $1 million from the government of Bhutan, classifying it as an adaptation project designed to strengthen the resilience of Bhutan's power sector. The project itself incorporates a lot of adaptation measures, such as improved drainage, strategic site selection to reduce the impact of landslides, revegetation, and sturdy panel mounting structures to withstand the climate-induced stresses. Besides enhancing the climate resilience, the project also offers significant climate mitigation co-benefits, as stated earlier. By exporting the surplus renewable energy to India, it helps displace the fossil fuel-based generation and thereby reducing the regional greenhouse gas emissions. This project is expected to avoid about 17 kilotons of carbon dioxide emissions annually, and over a lifespan, about 338 kilotons of carbon dioxide equivalent of emissions. You can see the impact, the outputs of these projects. First is to develop the utility scale non-hydro renewable energy generation. But we also have two other outputs where we increase the knowledge of the climate resilient renewable energy systems, which will be useful in our upcoming project pipelines. So in addition to this solar farm, Bhutan is also venturing into a reservoir type hydropower, where ADB is currently doing project readiness financing for a reservoir hydro. And also we have a 30 megawatt rooftop solar, a distributed solar project in the pipeline. And we're also increasing the capacity of our institutions, such as the Department of Renewable Energy, which is now the Department of Energy under the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources. So in conclusion, Bhutan's first utility scale solar power plant, the 22 megawatt Sifu solar farm, is designed to mitigate the risks of temperature increases and changes in the rainfall patterns, including extreme weather events like droughts and floods. With the estimated adaptation cost of 18.26 million, this investment is justified by the need to address energy instability caused by climate change impacts. Through diversifying our energy generation sources, Bhutan aims to secure its power supply and improve resilience to climate change, paving the way for a more sustainable and secure energy future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonam, for sharing the insightful case. We noted how solar power complement the hydropower, especially during the dry winter months, by providing a backup energy solution and overall enhancing the resilience of the system. So I see Mr. Sonam in the room he is from Ministry of Energy Bhutan, and also I see Steve, our energy colleagues who has a wealth of knowledge and experience on this topic. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts as well during the Q&A session, if possible. So now we have Jin-Sun from IEA. Jin-Sun is an energy and environment policy analyst, and she has led and participated in numerous policy advice regarding the energy and for Asian countries and across different continents. So let me invite Jin-Sun for her presentation. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for introducing me, Okju. And my name is Jin Sun Lim. I'm currently working as an energy and environment policy analyst at the International Energy Agency based in Paris. I would like to show you some of our work on the climate risk assessment for the energy system. And also I would like to give you one different example, which is not really coming from Asia Pacific, but coming from another continent to give you some kind of, there could be some applicable lessons as well. So electricity systems are witnessing increasing climate change impacts, as all of our speakers already mentioned. These impacts can shift the generation potential and output and also pose physical risks to the power system infrastructure. But the issue is that the level of the climate risk is actually different by technology. So IEA decided to conduct a climate risk assessment based on the climate hazard, exposure, and their vulnerability, and try to give the one by one, technology by technology and hazard by hazard assessment. So this table summarizes the level of climate risks of power generation sources and electricity grids to various climate hazards. Red indicates high risks, while green indicates low risks. The outcome of the assessment presents two strong findings. Currently, you can see the low emission scenario, which is many of the dots are actually green, light green, or yellow. But in the high emission scenario, you can see a lot of red and orange dots. So the first key findings of our assessment is the size of climate change impacts on power plants and grids is largely determined by climate pathways. In a low emission scenario, power systems are projected to face a comparatively favorable conditions and low level of climate risks, while the impacts will substantially grow in a high emission scenario. Second finding is that the level of climate risk significantly vary across power generation sources. For instance, decreasing precipitation and increasing droughts could be a big concern to thermal power plants and hydropower plants. However, the new variable renewable energy sources, such as solar and wind, as you can see that their climate risk level is comparatively lower. This is also same with the wind power plants. You can see that high level of risk related to wind and tropical cyclones of the wind power plants, but for the other type of climate hazard, they tend to be comparatively very resilient compared to other power technologies. These various levels of climate risks and resilience of power generation sources highlight the importance of diversification of energy sources. The diversified energy sources can help power system withstand climate-driven disruptions and maintain power supply, even when one of the part of the power system is disrupted or interrupted or damaged by climate disasters. So I would like to present an example of Morocco. We have worked together with the Moroccan government last year with the relevant ministries, tried to assess the climate hazard level for the different power system technologies. And also we tried to make some policy recommendations and trying to find, identify the policy gap where the climate resilience adaptation consideration for the energy system is missing and how they can develop those kind of policies to fill the gap. About 20 years ago, Morocco was heavily relying on two power resources, coal and hydropower. In 2000, 92% of power was generated by coal, and the rest came from hydro. However, Morocco started experiencing very unfavorable weather conditions in the past 2 decades on these two traditional technologies. Droughts have increased significantly in terms of frequency, magnitude, and duration, and climate projections also show more frequent and severe droughts will happen in this continent. This chart shows the exposure level of coal power plants, which was the major power generation source in Morocco. As you can see, Moroccan coal power plants are projected to see a much drier climate. Compared to the world average, of course, you can see the blue color is expected to see a wetter climate in the future. And the red and orange, they indicated they are expected to see a drier climate. Even compared to other neighboring countries of Morocco, Middle East and North Africa, we are expecting they are becoming dry. But even compared to its neighboring countries, Morocco is likely to expose higher level of dryness for their coal power plants. The projected increase in aridity would add stress on coal power plants because over 80% of total installed capacity are relying on water for cooling. Morocco initiated its efforts to replace coal power plants with natural gas combined cycle power plants. Now, natural gas power plants are covering around 12% of power supply, while coal's share decreased to around 60%. Morocco plans to install an additional 2,400 megawatts of natural gas power plants capacity by 2030 and completely replace coal-fired plants by 2050. Given that natural gas power plants tend to require less water for cooling and also emit less greenhouse gas, this kind of switch likely to contribute to the climate resilience as well as clean energy transitions. And also, this kind of less precipitation and droughts, not only the concern about the coal power plants, but also it has a critical impact on hydropower generation, which was the second largest power generation sources in Morocco. Due to the changes in climate, hydropower output already declined significantly from more than 3,600 gigawatt hour to 1,200 gigawatt hour between 2010 to 2020. So within one decade, it made almost became 1/3 of the generation. The hydropower capacity factor in Morocco could drop further if greenhouse emissions are not mitigated on time. So IEA has conducted this kind of assessment, how much hydropower generation capacity factor will drop in the future by the end of this century. So you can see in the slide that in the low emission scenario, which is we are supposing the below 2-degree warming, it is likely to see around 10% decrease. But if we go for the around 3-degree scenario, which is high emission scenario, it's likely to see more than 30% of hydropower capacity factor drops. Taking into account the projected decrease in precipitation, Morocco already has made 2 different solutions. The first is that trying to maintain the hydropower as a major source, but it tried to expand the capacity of pumped storage hydropower. So pumped storage hydropower usually operates in a closed loop, which means that it has a kind of less climate change impacts compared to other technologies such as run-of-river or impoundment. So they started installing more pumped storage hydropower plants. So the government launched the project for pumped storage hydropower in recent years, including the construction of Abdel Moumen pumped storage, and also announcement plan for the El Menjel and Ifasha, which is about 950 megawatts installed capacity. Second, Morocco started diversifying its power generation sources, increasing other types of renewables. So this shows the changes in electricity generation in Morocco. As you can see, compared to 2000 to 2004, in the past 5 years, power mix has been diversified with the growth of wind, natural gas, and solar, while coal and hydro, the traditional leading power sources in this country, has decreased. The diversification of generation sources can bring multiple benefits, as you can see. So including climate resilience, but also it contributed to the energy transition, because you can see that, for instance, hydropower, which was the leading renewable energy sources, the share has been decreased due to the climate change impact on the hydropower. But given the increase of the solar and wind significantly in this region, so thanks to these kind of changes, the share of the renewable energy sources in total has increased. And also it contributes to energy security in the country by ensuring that it can cope with the negative climate impacts in the country. So my presentation is until here, and thank you very much for your attention. And if you want further information, please visit our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Jin-sun. Morocco's experience is indeed impressive. That you illustrated how they could diversify the energy generation sources in such a short span of time, 20 years, as a way to enhance their climate resilience of the energy system. So now it's my pleasure to invite the Kelly, Principal Energy Specialist, ADB, and she will talk about the intersectionality and the synergies between climate adaptation and the mitigation actions through energy interventions. The floor is yours.
So we've heard this morning about energy systems and planning for resilience from a country perspective. And we've gone through examples, particularly recently with IEA, with regard to a country doing a risk assessment and ascertaining what's needed for further resilience. When we think about energy systems, quite obviously from a country perspective or a national perspective, you're often thinking about the grid. But as we know, there are solutions that are part of the overall planning that includes quite a bit of off-grid and community or distributed generation. And so my presentation today speaks to communities that are either challenged by access and the necessary planning that goes into that. And oftentimes when you think about these marginalized groups or these communities, oftentimes when it comes to financing, there's some competition between adaptation and mitigation. And one doesn't have to choose between adaptation and mitigation. That is, and either one or the other when it comes to tackling challenges of climate change. Indeed, environmental and community harms caused by climate change often perpetuate harms that are both environmental as well as associated with access. The lack of access to clean energy systems coupled with direct and indirect harm caused by climate change serves as an intersectionality of harms among peoples and communities. And so for me as an energy sector professional, this means that climate change worsens inequities that include lack of energy access, as well as threatens unique ecosystems, cultural resources, human health, livelihoods, the built environment, and access to clean water and healthy food. In addition, disaster events, which we'll hear from Belinda later, such as earthquakes, landslides, fire, compounded by extreme weather, quite clearly subject people, communities, to multiple climate change harms. Preparing for new extremes while cutting carbon emissions creates local benefits, improves health, makes for a stronger economy, and enables more resilient communities. There's several technologies that come to my mind when contemplating clean energy systems that in first instance aim to address issues of resilience from an adaptation perspective. That has at its core people and communities first. Now, before I dive into some examples of technology or intersectional solutions that address adverse impacts from climate change, it's important to note that some of these solutions are so innovative that energy and environmental experts are still collecting information to better ascertain comprehensive and degree of long-term benefits. Indeed, solar, wind, and even carbon capture, utilization, and storage, as seen on the slide, come to mind as energy system technologies that enhance people's resilience. So let's first look at CCUS. What is it that can be constructively done with regard to adaptation that improves community resilience? Again, particularly from a people standpoint. The concept of injecting capture carbon into land, particularly in Asia and the Pacific region, is gaining some traction from a pilot perspective as a possible sustainable agricultural practice. Now, this approach not only promises to enhance soil fertility and crop yields, but also plays an important, crucial role in mitigating climate change impacts. The process involves sequestering carbon dioxide and depositing it into the soil where it can be improved, and not the carbon itself, but the soil can be improved. And there is also water retention that is gained from this and nutrient recycling. I should say cycling as well as recycling. Countries like Australia, Malaysia, and Indonesia are emerging as leaders in this field, exploring the potential of carbon capture and storage to bolster their agricultural resilience while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This method can also help restore degraded lands. As most of us know, healthier soils can support a greater diversity of life, from microorganisms to plants and animals, thus enhancing biodiversity. However, the implementation of carbon injection in agriculture comes with its challenges. It requires significant investment in research and development to understand the long-term effects on different soil types and ecosystems. There's also a need for policies that incentivize community farmers to adopt these practices. So there's a behavioral change that is necessary. And there's a need for cross-border collaborations to share knowledge and resources. So I've shared an example of intersectionality of energy systems and adaptation under CCUS that address both the harm of unabated carbonization from an energy system or from an industrial system that uses intense hydrocarbon energy, and the harm that is caused by the lack of fertile soil to generate sufficient crops for food and or income. Looking at wind. Indeed, wind systems can be used to address water scarcity. Wind power desalination technology is emerging as a possible sustainable solution to water scarcity in the Asian Pacific region. The integration of wind energy with desalination systems, particularly through wind-powered reverse osmosis plants, is gaining some traction due to its potential to meet high energy demands while reducing cost and carbon emissions. Now, this innovative approach is especially promising for coastal areas and islands where wind resources are abundant and fresh water is scarce. And while this technology addresses intersectional carbonization and environmental harms to peoples caused by climate change, improvements to this particular technology is necessary because it can be made, before it can be made viable at full scale. Solar systems. Solar systems have provided quite a few contributions to improving the resilience of communities. Just like wind, solar can be used for water desalination, yet the same limitations exist. Also, there are examples of solar systems being designed in first instance to not only provide electricity to a community, but to benefit a community's agricultural lands to ensure more robust crop production. So in first instance, a solar farm's construction design configures the required solar panel specifically in a manner to provide shade for crops needed shading, because all crops don't need that, and gaps in panel placements that enable sunshine for crops that need more direct sunlight. Also, solar tube wells have played an important part in adaptation efforts here in Asia. David on our panel will speak to you later about adaptation plans that incorporate clean energy systems as part of their strategy in Bhutan and Kiribati. Also in Bangladesh, particularly Bangladesh hill tracts, where ADB has focused many partnership efforts, there lies an example of the Rangamati Hill District Community installed solar tube wells project that in first instance was formulated to improve water access for community members, bringing water to their homes as well as to irrigate local fruit orchards that the community relied on for both food and income. This intersectional project offers several lessons. The most important lesson being free, prior, informed consent through meaningful good faith consultations, not only for the purpose of ensuring safeguards, both environmental and social, but the application of free, prior, informed consent as important in first instance to enhance and better target actual project design benefits. Understanding what the community needs is at the heart of addressing intersectional harms resulting from climate change. However, I do understand that this is not always easy. There are often challenges that need to be examined from a policy and a regulatory perspective that address adaptation and decarbonization solutions for climate change harms head on. Well-known challenges in Asia and the Pacific region, countries that are associated with free, prior, and informed consent often include issues surrounding water rights and land tenure. Indeed, these challenges do exist. However, they should not inhibit the joint development of an adaptation and energy system project solution. More efforts are needed in project formulation to both assess effects and make room at project design for communities, particularly indigenous communities, in first instance, when formulating solutions that address climate change intersectional harms. I'm out of time, so I must end my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for your very comprehensive and engaging presentation on, I think, energy, water, and the community resilience nexus and the intersection. So next we have Belinda, a senior disaster risk management specialist at ADB. Her presentation will emphasize the importance of anticipatory actions for energy sector. So Belinda, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Okju. Yeah, pleasure to be here today. And just to also compliment the organisers on really lovely diversity and inclusion on the panel, it's really refreshing to be involved. So really building on what Toru and Orgo introduced earlier, I wanted to talk a little bit about ADB's overall approach to strengthen resilience in the energy sector and in power systems in particular, capturing a little bit of our experience from the Pacific. And in particular, talking about more the how. So how do we know what resilience investments are needed? How do we shift investment pipelines to focus on resilience? And then how do we manage some of the residual risks? So I think Toru and Orgo have already mentioned that ADB is really trying to shift upstream in our approach to building resilient power systems. And a key way that we can do this, a key way of investing in resilience is we need to start by understanding the risks and therefore understanding where are the investment priorities. And so we're doing a lot of work upstream to support risk assessment and inform resilient investment planning. So in 2021, ADB finished the first multi-hazard disaster risk assessment using a new approach. We're taking a very granular approach, focusing on the island of Tongatapu. And this covers multiple hazards, climate scenarios, and produces very granular level local data on specific potential climate and geohazard disaster impacts. And what are the risks, the quantified monetized risks to people and to infrastructure sectors, including power. You can see on one side here, we have, for example, pluvial flood predicted losses, average annual losses for power assets. And this very fine detailed data is very powerful in helping us inform things like revised spatial plans, which we're currently doing for Nuku'alofa, and identifying priority climate and disaster resilience investments. So we know some of our power systems, our critical assets are going to be potentially underwater or exposed to extreme inundation in a certain number of years. So what do we do about that? And in other Pacific countries, we're currently kicking off a process of undertaking power sector master planning, which incorporates risk assessment and resilience. It's equally important then for us to think about how do we use that risk and resilience prioritization process to shift investment pipelines. And so here, I just wanted to briefly touch on some of our work around ensuring that investments are resilient, and particularly through Build Back Better. We know in the Pacific there is extreme exposure and vulnerability to climate and geophysical hazards. We look at Vanuatu alone, we had 3 major cyclones last year. And when a disaster occurs, really what we're focusing on is just immediately reinstating infrastructure to try and minimize damages, harm to people and economic losses. So it's very difficult for us to stop and reassess, is this the right approach for reconstruction and rehabilitation, and really realize the opportunity that this kind of creative destruction of a disaster creates. So countries like Vanuatu and Tonga often get stuck in these harmful cycles of repair and recovery. And we're shifting our approach to work with them on longer term resilience planning. A really nice example that we have is from Tonga, where we supported, following Tropical Cyclone Ian in 2014, the development of a very resilience-focused power sector master plan, which looked at issues not just like protecting the assets, but strengthening the decentralizing of energy assets and bringing in renewable energy, for example, to build in more resilience. And so when Tropical Cyclone Gita occurred in 2018, we had widespread destruction of power assets, and we were able to use that as almost a blank slate to really leapfrog the implementation of that plan and immediately strengthen the resilience of those systems. There's also some really nice statistics around how, after we had reinvested in resilient power systems after Tropical Cyclone Ian, we found that only 5% of those upgraded power grids were damaged following Gita, compared to around 45% of the non-upgraded grids. So we have a Build Back Better publication that's actually coming out soon, and this has a power sector volume. David's actually our lead author for that, so I thought I'd give it a little plug. And this includes a range of approaches and case studies based on ADB's experience that we think are useful and effective approaches for building back better after a disaster, as well as regulate resilient energy systems development. There's a few of these listed down the side, but I won't go into them in detail. And finally, I think it's really important to recognize that we can actually only manage to reduce risks to a certain extent, particularly in countries like our Pacific developing member countries, where they just have this extreme exposure and vulnerability to climate and geophysical hazards. And it becomes either too costly or just not physically possible to completely eliminate the risk of impacts and destruction or damage to power systems. So the question here becomes more around, how do we really live with these residual risks, we call them? So the term anticipatory action refers to actions that we can take to reduce the impacts of a forecast hazard before it occurred. And this is not just standard disaster preparedness work, which is very important and which we have a really strong focus on in our work at ADB's disaster risk management, but it's about leveraging the very narrow window between when an early warning system forecasts an event and when that event either occurs or begins to have impacts on the system, to undertake actions that minimize the impacts. So for example, in the case of power systems, it might be preventative maintenance or even temporarily decommissioning part of the distribution system to ensure that it minimizes electrical damage. So what does it mean to have anticipatory action systems in place? It really requires a combination of very good forecasts for extreme weather events that can be operationalized, clear plans and procedures for taking action, finance for those actions, and then also coordination and strong delivery and implementation arrangements. So ADB in 2021 engaged the Overseas Development Institute to assess, looking at Tonga as a case study, their anticipatory action potential, focusing on the energy sector. So we found that Tonga and its main state energy utility, Tonga Power Limited, actually have taken already some really positive steps towards anticipatory action systems. So this includes having very reliable early warning systems in place for tropical cyclones with about 48 hours lead time, having some business continuity plans, as well as community level emergency plans. But there are, a number of gaps remaining, which include communications to the outer islands. They're widely distributed and they don't often have good cell phone coverage. Also, coverage of off-the-grid supply, so beyond the distribution system managed by Tonga Power. Anticipating not just that the event's going to occur, but for a particular nature of event, what will be the potential impacts and where, and therefore how do we react? Limited financing available, limited awareness at the village level to take these anticipatory actions for power systems specifically, and then also the arrangement of the advance actions themselves. And so we identified a number of recommendations for strengthening this anticipatory action, which includes shifting beyond just the early warning systems to actually analyze historic damage patterns and forward-looking risk projections and risk assessments to come up with impact-based forecasting for different natures of predicted events. And this will allow us to take earlier action to prepare the power grid for disasters. Also potentially elongating the early warning system window. We now have improved technology. We could actually move beyond the 48-hour window. And developing and strengthening standard operating procedures for anticipatory action and response across the full range of power sector stakeholders, not just the main utility. And then, of course, strengthening preparedness arrangements for faster recovery, such as stockpiling resources, community training, and so forth. And so ADB is increasingly looking at how we can integrate support for anticipatory action in our technical assistance, as well as our regular investment projects, through things like investing in early warning systems, strengthening institutional capacity, and establishing preparedness arrangements. We can actually even design infrastructure that is designed for anticipatory action. So for example, in Micronesia, we've supported the development of wind turbines that can be rapidly levered to the ground ahead of a tropical cyclone. I hope this gives a little bit of a flavour of the work we're doing, and happy to discuss further on the panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Belinda, for your powerful presentation and focusing on the importance of softer measures and the planning we call anticipatory actions to manage the residual risk. So I see some of you participants from the Pacific, so we hope to get your feedback on this presentation later during the session. So finally, we have our last presenter, and David. David is an expert in climate resilient energy systems, and he will share today his insight on the national adaptation plans, the NAPS, and how they include energy sector interventions, not only mitigation, but as the adaptation measures. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Oktu. It's wonderful to be here, and I appreciate Argo inviting me to contribute to this panel. And I'd like to start by just saying that my presentation will take us back up to a higher level in terms of less detail, more concepts. And I'm going to echo a lot of the concepts that Toru provided in his opening remarks and Argo provided in his opening remarks, as well as some that our other panelists have provided. So let me just start by, am I going the right way? Wrong way. There we go. So the idea here is that there's an intersection between clean investments that are provided for, usually thought of as maybe economic development, but often as climate mitigation, but have a very strong role in climate adaptation as well. So clean and distributed energy investments, this includes both renewable energy and, for example, energy efficiency, can provide dispersed and independent sources of bulk energy, and especially if storage is included, such as microgrids or mini grids with wider coverage than might be available for a central grid, depending on the country, that offer better resilience to some of the acute, especially, impacts of climate change, including episodic climate change related storms, for example. And this resilience is often better than what can be afforded by, for example, just climate proofing of central electric grid or of systems with standalone generators. Providing accessible energy supplies, that is better availability to more stable supply sources for areas like remote islands or remote villages in hilly places, versus the dependence on national and international fuel supply networks. The more complicated the network, the more opportunities there are for climate-related risks to interrupt those networks. And increased reliance for other sectors is resilience for other sectors is another key benefit of these energy sector investments, the distributed energy sector investments, because they can provide energy for desalination, for water pumping, healthcare, agricultural irrigation, and cooling, or for something like cooking. I attended a session yesterday where there's a lot of emphasis on cooking with electricity as an option with many different benefits. So energy is an input, energy services are an input to almost everything we do, almost everything the economy does. So it's very important to recognize the resilience there. Resilience to drought. Drought is another aspect of many distributed generation, especially solar and wind types of technologies, because you don't have to cool those technologies at least as much. And then increased community resilience benefits are another important aspect, where you have access to renewable energy and reliable energy with improved quality and availability, and that builds self-reliance of the community, gives the community the opportunity to control their energy system, and decreases the vulnerability to climate risks, often without very large upfront investments. So these types of investments and actions are consistent with the guidance from ADB's Type 2 projects, Type 1 being mostly climate proofing, and then there are a couple of Type 2 projects that are designed to reduce the vulnerability of climate change over time and to build resilience to climate change of the systems that are supported by the project, the systems across the economy. So I have, as part of the work that I'm doing for ADB, I've reviewed 6 different national adaptation plans in detail and about 20 others in less detail. And I just want to give you 2 of the examples from that. One is Bhutan, which we heard Sonam talk about earlier, has rugged topography going from 100 meters up to 7,500 meters, one of the few countries in the world like that, and is currently one of the only nations to look at to have net zero emissions, because its sequestration from forests it more than matches its use of fossil fuels. It's formerly been an isolated country, so there were like 274 visitors in 1994 and several 100,000 in recent years. And as Sonam said, there's an emphasis on hydro both for powering the grid and for export, but it varies with the season. So energy sector investments included in the actions that were included in the National Adaptation Plan for Bhutan include diversification of the energy system into utility and rooftop solar, green hydrogen, and energy efficiency, and improving the resilience of hydro to climate change, this being more of a climate proofing. And over 90% of the energy sector total from a dollar perspective was devoted to diversification. In Kiribati, totally different situation. You have 33 mostly low coral islands, a population mostly in one urban area, and in fact one low island, an extreme dependency on imported petroleum products, with just starting to develop solar energy generation. And energy sector investments included in the actions include enhancement of transition to renewable energy, off-grid electrification for remote islands, focus on resilience benefits to energy systems. And what this image shows is that the main petroleum storage for Kiribati, for effectively the main island and the entire nation, is located on a piece of land about 100 meters wide and connected to a ship berthing dock that's by a very narrow causeway. And what I'm trying to emphasize here is the system aspect here, that this system of petroleum imports is very fragile, especially with increasing sea level rise and climate change. So the lessons that we've learned so far, most countries are including often prominently diversification of energy sources and energy efficiency in adaptation and disaster management plans. I also ought to mention that many countries are combining disaster management plans and climate adaptation plans because some of the same risks appear, in fact, many of the same risks appear in both cases. There's an interest in building resilience and sustained across nations, whether they're in landlocked or island nations. There's a recognition of that the inclusion of economic, social, and other co-benefits is very important, and including links to sustainable development and climate change mitigation. So in the review that I did, in general, the more recent the plan, the more these renewable and energy efficiency actions are featured. And countries are showing an increased focus on the potential for these actions to affect not just single installations, but energy systems as a whole. And as energy systems are crucial to actions in most of the sectors, there remains room for a lot of intersectoral coordination, both room and need for coordination and adaptation planning, because so many of these sectors are dependent on energy and vice versa. So some next steps and key needs. Providing capacity building for planning that allows the evaluation of different approaches to providing energy services, and looks at energy needs and costs and the impacts of climate change on a system-wide level, looking at the whole economy if possible, and certainly the entire energy system. Emphasize the development of national and local skills needed, from policy development to on-site device installation and maintenance, basically skills from desk skills to really out in the field. Recognize the need for funders and donors to consider actions that provide climate resilience and other benefits as valid options for climate adaptation, and revise lending, granting, and priorities and processes to support those countries in seeking funds for those. And then focus on providing a variety of financing approaches, including incentives for private sector involvement, in recognition that some actions are going to require implementation of lots and lots of many very small measures rather than one big lumpy investment. and I just wanted to say, to tell one little story, which is about 1 million years ago when I was an intern for the World Bank's New and Renewable Energy Division. My boss was lamenting the fact that when he wanted money for new and renewable energy projects, he would go with his hat in his hand to the bankers and say, "Can you give me $1 million for this project?" And they say, $1 million, we can't even process the paperwork for that. So and that's changing, and I've seen that change in ADB, that there are new mechanisms for finding that money. So thank you.
Thank you, David, for your truly engaging presentation and clear lessons. And it will be very interesting to see how the scope of NEPs will be extended to address co-benefit of energy solutions. So now we are going to have a Q&A session. I'll hand it over to Argo. Thank you.
Right, thank you. We have got about 10 minutes time for Q&A, and that was an excellent set of presentation. Thank you, all of you. Very diverse, but very interesting. Anybody has questions, please keep it short. If you want to direct a specific panelist, please let us know, introduce yourself. And yes, please, over here. There's a microphone there. Thank you.
Good morning. I would like to thank first ADB for letting me in here. I'm from the National Anti-Poverty Commission, Victims of Disasters and Calamity Sector. I'm very interested on this particular workshop session because every time there is a disaster in the Philippines and power is not yet returned, our experience is more debt and more businesses are closing shop because of this problem. Our council would like to address this to, I don't know if anyone can answer this, because yesterday on the opening program, I'm going to ask Yusek Guevara from the OE because of their presentation, and here there is no connection between there is no development or investment on tidal energy. Philippines is an archipelagic in nature, no? Or are we really saying that we are surrendering to the climate change and the global warming because investment on tidal energy is nowhere to be found while we are talking about clean energy? So one thing, first is the immediate restoration of power in the disaster and calamity-stricken areas. Second is the investment on tidal energy. Third, we would like ADB also to be involved in October, ma'am, in the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. And one of the subject there is power restoration during and after, after the disaster. Good morning. And I'll be talking with anyone here later on the
Thank you. Very, very important questions. I'll take a couple of more questions. Then
by the way, I'm Larry Santos. Sorry, I just told my agency.
Thanks. We had another hand over there. Yes, please.
Good morning. I'm Bala Subramanian from India, representing National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. This question is for Kelly. I want to know about the project in Bangladesh. The solar pumps over a period tend to overuse groundwater because of long pumping hours and the opportunity available, and especially in drought areas. How the project has taken care of, or what is the safeguards placed to avoid or to have a sustainable use of groundwater? Yeah.
Thank you. One more question, please.
So my question is, good morning, and my name is Alinda Bhattacharya. I'm working in the space of climate resilience and sustainable development. My question is to Belinda that this is a very interesting presentation that you made, but I also heard that you raised the point of do the predictive forecasting of the disasters and the resilience. So I just wanted to understand that have you done any attempt to make these projections or not? Or otherwise, what actually I just gave one example that where we have also done that for the state of Kerala in India and for Goa both, where these are the two coastal states. What we found that in most of the cases, the disaster, the adaptation and disasters are missing out the future LULC changes. That is happening due to the different socioeconomic pathway development. So we found that if we don't consider, in most of the cases, if we don't consider how the LULC is going to change over the period of time, we are missing out a lot of impacts on the disaster, on the ground. So we found for at least these two states that there is another 15 to 20% variation is happening on this thing. And so that's what I thought that I will give. It is not a question, but just to, complement to your point that there is a way of doing this predictive forecast, because the weather forecasting is already a scientific projection, but what is happening on the ground with the people, how their life is changing, how the different infrastructural development is changing, because that depends on the different way of economic prosperity and growth. So I think that can be considered in this context. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your insights. Maybe we'll go to the panelists quickly. Kelly, do you want to start with your response?
Thank you for that question. And you're quite right. When you're using groundwater, you've got to be very careful with regard to conservation. One thing that I didn't share is there's a storage system that's part of this particular project. And it's 5,000 liter master tank. And it's from that tank that the distribution of water occurs. So it's not as if the individuals or the members of the community can go and take the water using the pumps freely as they wish. When you do get into an issue, it is a managed system. And once again, they use a storage tank from which to distribute the necessary water. I hope that helps. Okay.
Thanks, and thanks for bringing in the issue of decision making by people. That's very critical. Belinda, do you want to take the question on the post-disaster and the AMCDRR, please? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much for this. And definitely we are working towards APMCDRR and look forward to collaborating very closely on that. I think the issues on ensuring that anticipatory action and early warning systems are forecasting predictively and accurately and taking into account future changes is a really important point, and would be really interested to learn about that work in Kerala. So definitely in terms of ADB's role, so we're engaging through the UN's Early Warning Systems for All initiative, and that includes a range of work starting from the very bottom, as you've said, the evidence base, building that evidence base, understanding future changes. And there, we're not a research institute, but it's about having really strong collaboration in place with organizations like RIMES, with the Climate Research Institutes, to make sure we put the evidence base in place, and then we support things like the risk assessments I've mentioned that can all feed into having better early warning systems and forecasting of long-term changes. So that's, I think, the short answer.
Thank you. The partnerships play a critical role in this aspect, absolutely. We'll take another round of questions before we end. So the back, yes, please.
Good morning. I'm Beck Evangelista from the Senate Economic Planning Office of the Philippines. Building climate resilient energy systems is clearly beneficial both at the climate mitigation and climate adaptation side. Why is it that projects, this kind of initiatives, are largely project-based and we are not seeing large-scale uptake of these initiatives? Is it because there is no clamor from the ground? Is it or it is not really a priority of the government, or there are no capacities to begin with? What are the main reasons why these are not upscaled?
Great question. Perhaps you've already answered the question yourself, but we'll ask anybody else? Yes, please. And then you. Sorry.
Hi, good morning. Mark Matsuura, Hawaii Natural Energy Institute. So it seems from yesterday's presentations, today's presentations, I think there's a lot of good work in understanding the risks and trying to forecast the risk. And like you said, there's funds available, but they're not unlimited. So if you're a commission or somebody that needs to assess an optimized investment plan, what metrics can you use to say, you're not going to mitigate 100% of the risk. So what investment should I put? What are the low-hanging fruit? What are, how do you optimize your investments to hit as many of the risks as you can and optimize that investment?
Thank you. One last question, please.
Good morning, I'm Roger Mark D'Souza with PACT. I noticed with the Bhutan presentation, one of your objectives was around gender inclusion and social inclusion. And I wonder whether the panel could talk a little bit about the mechanisms for community engagement.
Great, thank you so much. Sonam, do you want to start?
Thank you for the question. So in the Jesse thing, what we have included in this project and in some of the other climate adaptation projects, if I can mention, is about a JFPR, again, a solar project. So there under gender, we have made sure that when we are training the institution, or even if you're training the community, we have included female-headed households. And also trained, we have made sure to include all the eligible female staff so that they are equipped with the required skills to take forward such projects in the future. And also under the other adaptation project, what we have done is we have identified a lot of households which fall under the poverty line. And we have particularly female-headed households, and we have identified those households to provide them with the solar panels from where they can kind of supplement their income, not just by using the energy, but also selling the energy to the grid to supplement their income.
Great example of linking inclusivity, but also livelihood opportunities and skill building. Thank you. Question on metrics and how do you optimize the use of limited finance? Anybody wants to take? David, do you want to?
Sure, I'll try that. I think one way you do it is by creating a master plan that actually looks at the costs of the different options. And when you talk about costs, you should think about net costs, because a lot of these diverse energy diversity options, yes, they have installation costs, and yes, they may have ongoing costs, but there's considerable savings. And the real challenge is bridging who pays the cost and who gets the savings, and coming up with financing mechanisms that go in between. So I think that ideally, and this is not always easy, what you want to do is do an overall plan, master plan, and then look at the individual options that you have before you and see what they can offer in terms of coverage, in terms of net cost, and in terms of support. Sure.
Yes, please.
Just adding on, I agree with what David says 100%. But when you're taking that comprehensive perspective, don't just look at what it is that the public sector has to bear with regard to the cost. Public sector has choices with regard to bringing in private sector under concessions, one, and including public-private partnership endeavors. And you have institutions like ADB and other MDBs that can help countries with that. And again, the priority setting based on the cost is hugely important, but you have to look at it from an entire funding perspective, PPP, private sector, and public sector funds.
So comprehensive understanding of the risk and resilience options, assigning responsibilities, and then deciding who's best stakeholder to bear the cost. I think that's the whole idea. On the last question, Jinsun, we want to come in. Why is this topic not being taken up at a more larger scale? Any insights, please? Thanks.
Very much. I believe there are many governments and also international organizations, they are working in a really high level, trying to provide this kind of climate risk information. But the issue is that this kind of climate risk assessment, when we are implementing a certain project, we need to customize and we need to tailor-made those kind of risk assessment. For instance, when we are thinking about there is a flood risk in this region, definitely this kind of risk is very critical for hydropower dam constructions or definitely electricity grids constructions. But the factors we need to consider when we are thinking about certain projects is really very different type of technologies. Maybe that's why we are seeing more initiative, more project-based assessment rather than government level assessment. But what we are currently providing is IAE is trying to provide these kind of interactive platform atlas, plant by plant analysis, so that all the private sector and public sector actors can find this kind of information without any kind of difficulties.
So these open source decision-making tools can be really useful. In the interest of time, I'm going to suggest we close the panel now. So thanks to the panelists, everybody, but I'll hand it over to Okju for your final words. And thanks to Okju for organizing the whole thing.
Thank you so much. In fact, we reach our conclusion, but we don't have a very specific closing remarks. But I just want to emphasize that this session was meant to be a learning exercise, and it was not aimed at finding one size fit all solutions, but rather to explore and think about different ways to enhance climate resilience through our energy interventions. So there is a reason why the title of this session is Energy Systems for Climate Resilience, not the energy systems, energy systems for climate resilience, and not climate resilience for energy systems or climate resilience of energy systems. So I want to thank you everyone, of course, all distinguished speakers and Argo and the Toru who just left, and all the effort made by the organizing team behind who worked very hard for the smooth learning of the event, and to all our participants here who are sitting here filling this room. And thank you so much for your active engagement. So just let's remember, as we discussed, the decision we are making today in planning, designing, and operations of our energy systems will have a very long-lasting impact. So in a sense, we are very much privileged in a position that we can make a change, and we can, contribute, to make a greater benefit for ourselves and also our future generations. So let's continue to collaborate and innovate and push the boundaries of what is possible. So thank you so much once again for being part of this session. And I hope you enjoyed the session as we did, and look forward to continue the discussion. Thank you so much.